Hello, welcome to the Play Typer Guy podcast. I'm Stephen Robinson. I'm pleased to welcome today Florida State Senator Shevrin Jones, represents the 35th District. Thank you so much for joining us,
Thank
Senator.
you for having me, Stephen.
So first off, how are you? And how is the situation down in Florida after Hurricane Helene?
Well, I'm doing well. And first, thank you for having me on today. I'm doing well down here in South Florida, but my friends up in North Florida and Southwest Florida in the St. Pete, Tampa, Hillsborough County area, they're still in recovery mode right now. And some of them are even displaced because they have to find other places to live. One of my good friends, Reggie, and his wife and their family, they lost everything, and so now they're
My
having
God.
to So then now they're having to find somewhere where they can live for the next 2 to 3 months, so until they can get back on their feet. It's devastating, right? I think this is one of those things that you kind of, as we should, throw political talking points and party affiliation out the window because the storm doesn't have a DRR or MPA next to their name, and I don't think the people who have been displaced truly care at all about politics at this time. So I'm happy to see the camaraderie and the collegiality that is happening right now with elected officials and people that's on the ground to help people get back on their feet.
My family's from the upstate, South Carolina, Greenville, South
Okay.
Carolina.
How they doing?
They're doing well. Fortunately, my cousin, I think her neighbor's house, a tree went through their roof.
No way.
She was spared. Yeah. And was talking to my father, and essentially, and I had grown up there from 70s, 80s.
Mm-hmm.
This was like nothing they'd seen before.
Mm-hmm.
Traditionally speaking, of course, with all respect to Florida, we always thought of these going back to Hurricane Andrew. It hits, and then what we get is, a few days of bad rain.
That's right.
And maybe make sure your basement doesn't get a little damp at
Mm-hmm.
worst. And then what we saw in Asheville, where, and I don't know if you'd seen this, there was stories from just a couple years ago how Asheville was described as a climate haven, so that if you wanted to try to escape what was happening, that's where you want to go because of
Yeah.
it's not far, it's far from the coast, it's high, high elevation. And for folks who don't know the area, I mean, that was the consideration, and now it's underwater.
Yeah.
And it is, frankly scary. I mean, I guess my question for you is because it's almost in a way like when there's school shootings, and there is a sense of we want to put politics aside. At the same time, there is this, the solution is in certain ways a political one regarding climate.
Yeah.
And from your situation, obviously the Governor Ron DeSantis's opinion of climate change, we kind of know
Mhm.
what that is, but
Yeah.
what are you seeing any sort of constructive measures of sort of proactively dealing with what is happening?
Yeah. And you know what, Stephen? I want to make sure. Let me make sure I make it clear that I don't think at that time or the time that most people are trying to do cleanup, to where a policy conversation should be happening. But
Hmm.
there is a policy conversation that should be happening, right?
Yeah,
when it
absolutely.
comes when it comes to climate change and the ever changing climate, especially within Florida, with the rising sea level that we know exists. It has been scientifically proven that it absolutely exists, and how and what we are doing to combat that. It doesn't make it any better that for places like Florida, where then Governor Scott, now Governor Ron DeSantis, have basically made it clear that we want to take any words of climate change, climate justice, or any of thing dealing with the climate directly. We want to take those words out of our off the books here in the state of Florida. So rather than actually addressing the issue, they're not doing that. I mean, think about it. What type of state would it be? What can we be if one would put together a climate task force to talk about best solutions and what it looks like, considering that hurricane season comes by every year, and these hurricanes are getting worse and worse every year. What we should be talking about what this look like. We should be talking about how we should be combating this and ensuring that people, when they're going to create claims for insurance costs, that they're doing everything that they can to that the insurance can turn over these claims in timely manners. But that's not happening. Those are things just not happening. So if we want to have a policy conversation, oh, there's a policy conversation to be had.
Hmm.
Uh, and I think it is. I think we're coming up to a time, Stephen, to where even people who probably are leaning Republicans are making it clear that it's time for us to start having a clear conversation on what it looks like to deal with this right now.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Um, and you talked about the recovery, and regarding those efforts, I mean, the federal government has been responding swiftly. But what was interesting, and I've been writing about this, there was a point, and again, not to make it political, but certain Florida Republicans, House Republicans, like Matt Getz and others, had voted against funding the government and funding FEMA, um, and just it reinforces that if you kind of make a political game out of shut down the government, which I think Donald Trump has done, like this is the real world. Like we kind of need a government functioning because this is what happens. And to sort of do this in hurricane season, or any time really, was particularly shocking to me. But those dollars are obviously going to be necessary for recovery, but down the line when people lose everything, um do you think there's enough support for those folks, or what do you see as sort of the long term
Yeah.
hope for
Yeah.
those people who essentially are homeless now?
Yeah. you, you- you know what's disheartening is you have Republicans who much rather make a political statement than than create a solution to a chaotic problem that they caused. And I'm
Yeah.
more particularly talking about here within the state of Florida. You see the former president just on the news yesterday during a news conference and saying that, oh, that the president of the United States didn't reach out to Governor Kemp in Georgia. He's been trying to reach him and he didn't. And even Governor Kemp was like, well, that's a lie because I spoke to the president. Yeah, there's it's disheartening because I go back to what I said in the beginning, Stephen, to where there are people who have been displaced who they don't that is not at the top of their agenda right now. The top of their agenda is like is how do I get back on my feet?
Hmm.
And what Matt Gaetz and Donald Trump and all these other leaders are doing just to make a political point. Why are you in office?
Yeah. And it's terrifying people. I think
Yeah,
President Biden, I think, put it very well. If he
yeah,
was angry, say what you want about me. There are
yeah.
people, desperate people right
That's
now,
it.
and they're hearing either the president saying that, the federal government doesn't care,
Yeah,
or that we're, and I think Matt Getz and Donald Trump Jr. have said this, others on the right, that all this money is going to Ukraine and not uh, to to the people on the ground in America. Again, a lot of divide and conquer. When I think, as you had said earlier, we need to be sort of coming together to
right.
solve a solution, and that is certainly um, discouraging. I think,
Yeah.
you know, I had written about this last year because Florida was going through a very difficult period. Um, it, it's heat, like to the point where I think pools were not, they were having to keep their kids away from pools because they were that hot. The coral reefs were, uh, being scorched, and this was the clear crisis. And Ron DeSantis and a lot of Republicans in the state legislature were not addressing what is impacting everyone, but was seemingly trying to use their power to target vulnerable people, trans people, the LGBTQ community in general. And so, you're the first queer Black person elected openly queer to the Florida State Center, and I think Black and in general.
Mhm.
And what are your thoughts on that, as someone who sort of want to see sort of, people from this community being targeted when there's so many other serious problems going on.
Yeah. So there's this. I always start this when people ask, when I get asked this question. I always start off with this idea to where people call people like that homophobic,
Hmm.
and I don't even consider these people homophobic. I mean, you're not scared of the LGBTQ community. You are what you are afraid of what America looks like now and how different America looks now, right? Because if we would tell the truth about what's happening, it is the Republicans have gotten on a bandwagon that they believe is a winning issue by attacking marginalized people, whether gay, whether immigrant, whether black, Hispanic, it doesn't matter. They have gained on an issue of America first. We want our country back. Back to what is what many of us don't know what that is. And so when people ask me about what my belief is, what's happening in Florida and across this country, yeah, it is genuinely a power struggle that we're dealing with, because there are people who are in this country who have been in power for so long that they cannot believe that America is actually the melting pot that it has always been.
Hmm.
And now that America is changing in this browning or rainbowing or whatever you want to call of America, and you have individuals who are impeding on that, it's only because it's political expediency for themselves.
Hmm.
All the while, they're seeing that it actually was a losing issue.
Hmm.
Culture wars did not get the Republicans to the place where they think or thought that it would have gotten them. As a matter of fact, if you look at the last election, they lost horribly across the country because of these culture wars. They lost horribly in Florida by even when we elected Donna Deegan in Jacksonville, which was the first sign, and then Tom Keene, which was the second sign that your policies don't work. People want leaders who are going to govern. They want leaders who are speaking to their pocketbooks, their checkbooks, their wallets, and putting food on their table. Those are the issues who people are worried about. They're not worried about who's reading books to their if a drag queen is reading books to their child.
Hmm.
They're not worried about if a rainbow flag is flying in their classroom. That's not putting money on people's table. You know, the people who are having those conversations, the people who are stuck on this are these individuals who gonna have to have the conversations about where their next meal gonna come from.
Yeah,
Those are the
absolutely.
people who are having these conversations. Those are the people who are at the rallies. Who many of them, some of them, yeah, they don't have to work.
Hmm.
But people in my district, they don't have time to have a conversation about someone's sexuality because they just want to put food on their table, clothes on their back, and feed their families.
Um, and you were a member of the Florida House of Representatives. You were representing the 101st District. That's Southeastern Broward as well.
Right.
And you'd been doing that since 2012,
Mhm.
which is a key sort of election. I think Barack Obama carried the state.
Mhm.
And since then, Democrats definitely have had challenges. Um, both Hillary Clinton lost, Joe Biden lost. Ron DeSantis has won twice, though the first time very narrowly. As someone on the ground there looking around, should we dare hope? I mean, I've seen polls where um, and the Senate race, Democrats are doing, the Democratic nominee is doing better than might be anticipated against Rick Scott, and so forth. And I've also seen this written that the state is a red state now,
Mhm.
and there's no kind of going back from that. What's your thoughts on sort of what's happening?
I just told someone yesterday to hell with the polls, amplify the people. Amplify the people, because at the end of the day, the biggest poll is going to be on November the 5th, right? I think we can so often get caught up in the poll war that whether and now listen, I'm a man of science, I'm a math guy, so I get it, but I also want to make it clear that polls are a snapshot in time at that moment, right?
Hmm.
But then we're also not talking to the people who I believe are actually going to come out and vote. I think we're going to be extremely surprised at the people who are going to come out and vote on November 5th and those who are receiving vote by mail ballots, because in the state of Florida, we have a great deal of interest that are on the ballot this go round. We have Amendment 3, the legalization of recreational marijuana. You have Amendment 4, a women's reproductive health. And you have other things that's on the ballot that in local elections that's also happening that can motivate people. I believe that Florida is an absolute critical state. This is a critical election, and it's one that we're determined to win. I think we're going to win. I know that we have. I know in 2022 we saw something that was just abysmal for the Democrats, but at that time the Democrats weren't as organized as we are now. I'll be the first to say it. We weren't as organized. We were taking multiple victory laps when we should have been remaining at the doors, when we should have been remaining at registering people to vote, when we should have been remaining at going to some of these battleground areas. We got comfortable. I don't mind saying that. And some people might get upset with me saying it, but it's absolutely true, right? But it's a totally different time now. As the chair of the Miami-Dade Democratic Party right now, you know what I see? I see every day my phone blowing up in our WhatsApp group with people. They're doing door knocking. They're doing postcard writing. They're doing phone banking. They're doing canvassing. They're doing parties at their house. They're doing small. All of this is happening because I call it the 2008 effect. Because people saw what happens when we sleep at the wheel. The damn car goes off the cliff. And that's what we saw, and that's what we've seen. And I think now that we're getting back on track, you got Chair Nikki Freed, who has been leading the charge here in Florida to bring this momentum back. I think it is going well, but we can't stop this momentum in 2024. This has to transcend into 2025, into 2026, and we got to keep doing it until we win. It took the Republicans over 20 years to get back into the place where they are now, and we're not going to change overnight. I can tell you this. I heard something. Eric Holder said something yesterday, and I'm going to steal it from him. He said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it always bends towards justice. But we have to be the one to pull the string for it to bend. And I think that's right now.
You've got to do the bending. You've got to get out there.
We got to be the ones to do it. And I can tell you that the campaign has committed the infrastructure for us to talk to the voters from all the way from Pensacola all the way to Key West. I've seen it. And I'll shut up after this. 45,000 volunteers have signed up to and mobilized to volunteer for this campaign. 45,000. That's a lot of people. That's especially within the state of Florida that people believe is a red state. That don't sound like a red state to me. That sounds like people who mad as hell.
And going back to that, even in a narrow loss, there's a huge difference down ballot, right? Like getting a lot of these districts, House districts, and sort of flipping the House, the U.S. House, and then obviously there's a very seriously gerrymandered map that you guys are dealing with that Ron DeSantis and Republicans put forward. Do you see folks ideally not giving up, but obviously frustrated by that in the sense of where they are trying to sort of neutralize, particularly people of color's vote with like the maps that they're being drawn and so forth? Can you speak to some of what was going on there with DeSantis's congressional map and so forth?
Racism at its highest extent. And I am one who is very careful in throwing that word around. But I am very clear when I see it. Because when you can blatantly break up a black district because you know of the African American turnout, I call it voter suppression. I call it whatever you want. But I got to call it out when I see it. Because racism at its highest extent. When you purposely gerrymander black folk out of representation, not only is it disheartening, it literally takes me back from what we've read in history to where in the Jim Crow law days, this is what you saw. Because they saw blacks who had access and they wanted to do everything they could to minimize and lower the impact. And I had a front row seat in seeing that. Let me tell you how blatant it was. It was so blatant. I was sitting in my office while we were preparing to go in the chambers for the debate. I looked at the map of Miami Gardens, which is the largest black district in the largest black city in the state of Florida. There was a map that split Miami Gardens in half. Now, Stephen, if I had not read the law that you could not break up a city, the lines had to be contiguous. That's what the law said. They broke up Miami Gardens, which broke the law that those lines weren't contiguous. I sat in my office and I said, well, this doesn't seem right. I set up a meeting with the legal team upstairs. And I said, now, I don't think I'm wrong, but I'm going to file an amendment to keep Miami Gardens whole. You think they fought me on it? No, they didn't. Because it was the truth, it was a fact, and it was based on law. But if we had not seen it, today, Miami Gardens would have been broken up and they would have had two different congressional members, which would have lightened the impact of the black vote here within the state of Florida. So when people say representation don't matter, it does. And that's why I always tell people, just because they're your color don't mean they're your kind. Because there are individuals who allow this type of stuff to happen, won't say anything, all for the sake of getting something out of the deal. On the backs of who though? On the backs of people who can't come to Tallahassee on their own, and they send you to represent them to call out the foolishness. So of course, gerrymandering is happening in Florida. And of course, it will continue to happen until we put the right leaders in place who will call them out on it.
And I know Ron DeSantis perhaps shamelessly invoked Dr. King, the one line from the one speech Republicans think Dr. King ever made with about content of color, but the idea being that, oh, well, setting aside separate districts or even taking into account race shouldn't be. We're just drawing colorblind maps or so forth, or just, but it's clearly not. They are going in, my understanding, they're going in specifically stating these people predominantly vote a way that does not help us, so let's neutralize them. And if they were actually thinking that if they weren't thinking of black people as a conglomerate, they wouldn't necessarily believe, they wouldn't go out of their way to draw some of these. Right. I mean, outside of Texas as well, their states, Nancy Mace in South Carolina, where it's bizarrely drawn clearly to cut out black people, and the impact down the line. And you're seeing it, right? You get much more radical House members, both state and federal, because they're not accountable. They're only accountable to potentially people within their own party. They're at risk of being primaried, but not in a general election.
That's right. That's right.
And
but you know what? The crazy thing about this whole idea of this colorblind America, that I really want Republicans, they should go look at Ronald Reagan's colorblind America. What came after that? What came after that was conversations of affirmative action and as far as college admissions. What came after that was companies and how they thought African Americans making equal to what white men and white women was making was a part of a discrimination against white folks. I mean, this idea that we live in this post-racial society, not just now, but even back in the 80s, all of it has been a bunch of BS all for years. Come on, I mean, let's be honest, right? And I think that if we want to have a true conversation about why these things are happening, it is truly happening because we are dealing with not a political struggle. It's a power struggle that's happening right now because America is changing. Leadership is changing. Leadership doesn't look the same. It is not a bunch of white men in position of power anymore. There are people who are black, gay, indigenous, you name it, that are in power. And because of that, people are changing, policies are changing, ideas are changing, and what America looked like is changing, and it's okay. They want to make America great again because they believe America was great when it looked like that, and it didn't. And America wasn't great. America is getting better now, and I think we can, as soon as we get over this election and elect Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, I think that's when America will be back on track and moving in a direction where we can say that we're moving in a good place.
When folks talk about Florida becoming a red state or growing more conservative over the years, it is interesting because Donald Trump himself might arguably sort of represent that, right? Like he was in he was in New York, didn't particularly like both either the diversity or just living there, and he moved to Florida, and he talks about how much better Florida is. But he does represent folks who have similar politics who have moved to the state, and or perhaps are shifting it right in certain areas. But from your end, it seems there's a sense of just sort of energizing young people, people of color, but obviously everyone, but getting people to vote. I know Stacey Abrams in Georgia had said that of like, usually the problem is that it's not necessarily that the state is red, it is a purple state where people have gotten demoralized. And I think going back to what you're saying about the gerrymandering, is that part of the strategy as well? Because why would I feel like my vote's not going to matter, I'm not going to bother, especially if it's to vote. And again, part of the system, right? Like making it harder to vote. If I have to take a full day of work or half a day, and that actually means something, right? Like to take a half a day off, that's going to impact my life, and try to figure that out. I'm thinking, is it really worth it? How often do you come upon that sort of, does it really matter type of mentality, and how do you break through it when you're canvassing?
Quite often. I was just with a group of people yesterday at dinner prior to the debate, and one of the gentlemen, he actually made mention of it. He said that I wasn't. He said I didn't. I never participated in the voting in voting because he said I don't think it works. I don't think my vote matters. And with those type of people, I can't go into them and talk to them and say, oh, I know a race where individual lost by one vote. They don't care. I can't speak to them about what it looks like when you have the wrong people in power, because most of these people are like, well, listen, I dealt with 3 or 4 years of Donald Trump, and I was just fine. But you know what did change their mind? I said, what about Donald Trump wanting to give police officers full immunity?
To do whatever they want,
Do whatever they want. And my friend, he said to me, at the table, about 12 of us at the table, and he said, Shevrin, that's what got me wanting to vote. He said, when I was on TikTok, and when I saw that Donald Trump wanted to give immunity to police officers, and I support law enforcement, but I'm making a point. He said he made it clear. He said, wow, they talk it through with white men and women, while they might talk it through with Hispanic men and women, when it comes to us, we are a threat to them. And if you're telling me you're going to give immunity for them to do whatever they want to me, and because we have been on the receiving end of not just killing, but also the injustices that happens at the stop, that's where black men pause. I saw it with my own eyes last night. That's when the first time I've seen black men sit at a table, it was like, that's what did it for me.
And he's, you can't escape. He's a convicted felon calling for this, who, has been indicted. He's out on bail for campaigning. He does not, obviously, when his tough on crime rhetoric, it makes it even more obvious that it's targeting a certain group of people, because it's kind of like he's not necessarily worried himself about how he, as a literal criminal, how even that label. So Republicans have sort of, that label is clearly only targeted towards people of a certain race or a certain income, because there's a sort of cognitive dissonance. They don't think of themselves as voting for a criminal when
Mhm.
he literally is. Um, my one last question for you, and in respect for your time, last night during the debate, I'd seen the varying discussions of how to address housing, and of course, um, Tim Walz and Kamala Harris have actual constructive policies.
Mhm.
Uh, under Vance and Trump, there was this idea of mass deportations helping to ease, and I posted this on my Substack. Like, well, I don't think that you know immigrants are taking up all of the classic sixes and craftsman homes in the area. That's the reason you're not able to find these. So it's absurd. And what seems especially crazy is that, you were just talking about recovery and whatever. They're talking about not just a major part of our labor force, mass deportation, but people who, generally speaking, do most of that construction and labor in many ways to build homes or to rebuild. Like, what you're doing is not only inhuman, it won't even achieve what you're trying to do. It will actually increase costs. So how do you respond to that? It just seems as if their only response is to point over and say the reason you don't have a cookie is that this person has two. I don't, what's your take on this?
I don't have a response. You can't. Yeah, you can't make sense out of nonsense. And for the fact that JD Vance, he sat up there and lied for the entire debate was absolutely insane. I mean, I think last night we absolutely saw a two drastically different visions for what America looked like for those for from both sides. I mean, from both sides. You of course you have Kamala Harris who does and Tim Walz who wants to move this country forward, and then you have what we just saw with Trump and JD Vance who wants to continue to maintain us where we are, and I mean wants to go back even further than it was and worse than we were when Trump was president. And so you can't respond to that. You can't respond to an individual who doesn't believe that a woman should make her own choices for her body. You can't respond to individuals that believe that the Haitian community are individuals who eat animals and pets. You can't respond to individuals who believe that a stepmom or a stepfather are not real parents. You can't. These people are not serious about America getting better. These people are not serious about moving this country forward. And shame on the Republicans for supporting them
Yeah,
and think that it's
absolutely.
okay. And think that this is what you call leadership. With I damn sure don't want to see what non-leadership look like with you all. I don't. It's absolutely insane. And listen, and I'm gonna say this, and I won't. And I mean it when I say it. That the America that the some of these Republicans are trying to support, it's the same America that they're going to leave their kids in, and their kids themselves don't even want to live in that type of America because their children are. I'm seeing young people who have Republican parents who are pushing back on what we're seeing in American politics today. And shame on the Republicans for supporting this type of leadership because it's not leadership. This is an absolute coup that's taking place.
Mhm. Thank you so much, Senator, for your time and your leadership on the ground there. If folks do want to help with Florida, either you know with the recovery or even just traveling to Florida down the line, what are some things that people can do
Mhm.
to help?
Oh, well, one thing they can do, they can go to Florida Democratic Party website. There's quite a few different websites that currently exist right now, to where they talk about a lot of the efforts that's taking place, and some of the efforts that's happening in Hillsborough County, some that's happening in the Panhandle, some that's happening in Jacksonville. They also can go to my social media page, Shevrin Jones, on Twitter, Instagram, and also on Facebook. Representative Michelle Rayner and Representative Lindsey Cross, all of them, they all have things on their pages where how people can get involved in helping on the recovery efforts. If you send me an inbox, I can absolutely shoot you over those individuals' information so you can participate because there's a lot of help that's needed, and it will take well into the year before we get back on track.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Senator. Thank you so much for your time, and let's hope the voters come out and surprise us in Florida. I would love to see it.
And me
Thank you
too.
so
Perfect.
much.
Thank you, Stephen. Take
Thank
care.
you.
All
Bye
right.
bye.
Bye bye.